Hi friends, Josh from the Narrate team here. In part 4 of Narrate's series, Merge, Adam asks, what if merging at times requires trusting God when it doesn't make sense? Adam shares a story from the Bible that details one who chose to trust God when it didn't make complete sense.
Hi, you guys. Fantastic to be back with you. Some of you will know I got the privilege last week of following my wife around Ecuador. There's some projects that we've been a part of there as a church. Families with Heart is an organization we helped start, and we have a crew that's going down in August to do some projects with them. And so my wife's been a part of that, and just kind of follow her around it was a fantastic trip. So thank you for those of you who are praying over all that. Here's my one story from Ecuador, though there's many I'm sure that will come. So Quito, the capital of Ecuador, is at 9,100 feet in elevation. Noreen and Bob, the people that we work with and who started Families with Heart, they live at 60 feet in elevation. And my wife told me before, hey, so it's about a 4-hour drive from the airport to where we went to Bob and Noreen's house. But what wasn't mentioned was in the first 70 kilometers, you drop 9,000 feet. So picture the Beartooth Pass for 2 hours. With no shoulder on the road, 2-lane road, buses, semis passing on these blind hairpin corners, and neon lights everywhere because they like their neon down there in South America. So anyway, it was a really good trip. If you haven't been with us before, welcome. If it's been a while, it's great to see you. And even if this is home for you, what I thought we probably should start is just kind of like where we've been, because we're in this conversation called Merge. And we started it way back at the Civic Center on Christmas Eve, and we said that there's kind of a predictable collision that all of us are facing. And it's the fact that at some point our willfulness gets interrupted by things we can't control. And what we've been exploring is the fact that it's not one or the other, it's both that we have to learn to embrace. That being a willful person, a person who has strong designs on the future, strong opinions about who God is and what he's about and how he's going to be active in our future, strong designs about our business and our kids and where things are headed, that's part of the way God has made us, and it honors him when we lean into it. But the angst, the collision is from the but, really. It's from the, but wait a minute, there's going to be interruptions. There's going to be a diagnosis. There's going to be a deviation from the path. There's going to be a disruption. There's going to be something outside of our control that we don't get to determine, and we have to deal. And so we've been exploring is this idea that it's important to be willful, but it's also important to be surrendered. And really the thesis has been, what if those people who thrive, and by thrive, what we're talking about is we don't mean their circumstances are perfect, but what if the people who have great relationships, who experience joy and gratitude in life, who are fulfilling their desires to matter in their everyday life, who are connected with God, what if those are people who merge, who understand that somehow we have to get vulnerable enough to continue to be will-filled, to want things and plan for things and hope for things, and at the same time to understand things will happen out of our control. And so in that first week, really on Christmas Eve, I think it was really about just awakening ourselves to the fact that our sleeplessness and our anxiety and many of those things that make life so unbearable, if not miserable, it comes from the fact that we want things, and yet we don't always get our way, and there's a tension there. And so we just began to explore, what if we learn to merge? And what if thriving people do merge? And then in the next week, that first week in January, can you believe it's been like 5 weeks since Christmas Eve already? Easter's in 9. Anyway, the first week, that first week we just said, as we were asking the question, how do we do this? The first thing that came up was, what if we embraced what the text and what wisdom says about understanding that it's wise to be fully engaged in the battle, but it's also wise to understand that you don't have control of outcomes. That there's these two things we have to do simultaneously. And I don't know about you, but for me over the last couple months, it's been incredibly freeing to come up against those things where uncertainty is the norm, and to go, wait a minute. I can't control that. So I'm staring at the edge of this road in Ecuador, and the drop-off off the edge of the asphalt was like 2 feet. I mean, it's just like sheer because it rained so much. And I'm watching the driver who feels like it's getting inches away, centimeters away from the edge of it, going like, he puts a wheel on that thing, and then I miss my flight, and then like the world collapses and I don't get home on time. And there's just a sense of like, wait a minute. I can't control that outcome. That was the first week. Second week, we talked about what if we became just a little bit less reactive. because I know you don't have this issue, but I do, where things interrupt my path and then I pounce, like something happens and you get angry and you blow up. And what we said is, what if we understood the way God made our bodies? What if we understood the way God made our minds? What if we understood the way our emotions work? And what if we could catch ourselves in those jolts and understand what happens predictably, and how do we understand, like, wait a minute, we're supposed to merge here. And then last week, Josh talked about obedience and did a fabulous job of helping us understand that obedience is a good word, not a bad one, that God wants things for us, isn't trying to keep things from us. This morning, before we get into where I want to go, because we have 2 weeks left in this conversation that I want to unpack, but before we go, this morning, especially if you're a guest and especially if you're someone who doesn't follow Jesus, I have a bit of a confession to make this morning. But because it would be impossible for you to know, if you're a guest, how hard and how hard we work and how much we desire to create experiences on Sunday morning that are engaging and helpful no matter what you currently believe about God and Jesus. And it's not that we don't, many of us believe things about Jesus. I do and we do. But we also think that God's grace is so sufficient, his common grace so profound, that even if we're denying him, his truth works in marriage and in parenting and in business and in finance. And so we're constantly trying to find common denominators of what are these things that we can talk about that matter in the lives of people who follow Jesus and those who don't. And I say all that to say this morning, I want to turn what is, I guess just to be as forthright as I can, a very Christian corner. And it's not that I'm ashamed of being a Christ follower. It's that I realize that this morning, it pretty much assumes that you follow Jesus. And it's not that, therefore, if you don't, like, you shouldn't be here. It's not like that at all. And I don't even think that there's no value for you. But the big value this morning, I think, would be to go, like, what, in your attempts to merge and to catch yourself in those situations that are challenging you to, how would following God play into that whole discussion? And for those of you who do follow Jesus, I think the real challenge for you, and I'll try to come back to this, is there is the way we want to follow God, and then there is the way that he oftentimes asks us to follow him. And this morning, I want to get at that second one a little bit. I think it's a bit of an audit to go, wait a minute, is our following of him consistent with the way he often asks us to follow him? Because here's the question that I want to ask. Go ahead to that next slide. It's simply this: what if merging will at times require trusting God when trusting God makes no sense? What if merging, and I don't think this is all the time. In fact, I think it's just some of the time and probably not all that often. But what if every once in a while, God is going to go, okay, we need to merge. And your natural inclination is to go, why? And he's going to go, not on this one. Not giving you this answer. I'm just asking you to trust me. Just asking you to trust me. Maybe for you, maybe there's a diagnosis you're staring at, and you're like, seriously, Lord, the last 30 years, it's been all about you, and now this? Why? Why cancer, God? Why? Why her cancer? Why my cancer? Maybe you're a student, and listen, in our culture, if you were to open the text and read what it says about sex, and if you were to do that as a single person, a high school student, a college student, maybe you're single and in your 50s and you never thought that would happen to you again. If you were to read what the text says about sex, you would go like, that makes no sense. It makes the opposite of sense. It makes no biological sense. It makes no cultural sense. It certainly doesn't make popularity sense. It certainly doesn't make sense if I'm ever going to not be single. It just makes no sense. And maybe this is one of those where God's going, hey, wait a minute. It'll make sense someday, but not right now. Or if you open the text and understand the way God talks about your stuff, your money, and you're to understand that God goes like, hey, wait a minute, put my kingdom before your own, put my work before your work. And then if you were to even look outside of the text and see how source after source says, like, you're more fulfilled with 80% than you are with 100 anyway, but you were to go, wait a minute, this makes no sense. In fact, one of the things God doesn't say is give when you can afford to. He just says give. And as 21st century Americans, it's the opposite of what makes sense. Every once in a while, God just maybe you're in a marriage, and everyone outside of you is saying, go, 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 go. And you know God is saying stay. And listen, that's not to suggest that divorce is never an option. Not for a second do I believe that, but you know And those whom you confide in and trust as you try to follow Jesus, they're affirming, stay, stay. And it makes no sense. What if every once in a while, part of what involves, and listen, if I could change this, I would, so would you. But what if periodically there's going to be a handful of moments in your life where you go, God asked me to merge by trusting him, and I didn't get to understand the rationale until later. You know, Andy Stanley, who I'm indebted to for some of the observations this morning, he tells a story involving a grand piano. When he was in college, he played some music and kind of made a little money off to the side. And one occasion, he went to this Christian college to perform some music, I'm assuming in their chapel. And when he got there, the tech person was kind of like, okay, here's your spot, get set up. And so he got to getting set up. And then he noticed there was a grand piano off to the side on the stage, but kind of pushed over to one side. And the tech guy said, so you finish setting up, and I'm going to get some people, and we're going to move the piano so that, you know, that everything's prepared for you when we start. And so he finished setting up, really thought nothing of the grand piano, but then when he was done, he was kind of twiddling his thumbs with nothing left to do, and the guy wasn't back, and he looked at the grand piano, and much like this one, it had wheels on the bottom, and he thought, what kind of place is this? I can move the grand piano with my pinky, you know, like, or my whatever. I can push the thing off the stage. And so he walked over to it, and sure enough, the wheels were unlocked, and he nudged it just a bit to determine he could, in fact, move it. And so he started heaving. Well, what he didn't know was that years ago, the pedestal under the big part of the piano had been broken off. And so that whenever you had to move the piano, it took a bunch of people, because some people had to hold that end up while the other person, like you have an end table like this in your house. I know you do. It's because everybody you had to kind of move the thing over there, and then the guy with the pedestal had to put it under the grand piano and set it down. Well, he didn't know that. And so he started pushing on, I don't know what, a $10,000, $15,000 piece of equipment, and push, and he huffed and he puffed, and he blew the house right down. Keys and strings and cords everywhere, he said. His attempts to make a little bit of money on the side backfired. And I think that captures the essence of one of the most frustrating things about following God, doesn't it? Is that sometimes he, through his word, through good counsel, through a trustworthy friend, is going to say, do this. And you're going to go, okay, God, I'm a reasonable person. Just give me the why. I mean, I love those principles. You say do this, and I'll do this, and don't do this, and I won't do this. God, just give me the why. And oftentimes he does, but every once in a while, doesn't he go like, no, not on this one. What I want to get at this morning is why would he do that? And to do that, I want to jump into the story of a guy named Naaman. You find his story in the book of 2 Kings, and we're going to power through a lot of text this morning. If you're someone who likes lots of Bible in your church, this is your weekend. Come back next weekend, and it might not be. I'm not sure, but here we go. Not that we don't like the text, you know what I mean. Okay, so now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but, there's always the but, he had leprosy. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. So here's the situation. Next to the country of Israel was another country called Aram, and Aram, their whole GDP depended not upon them mining their own gold or growing their own grain. Their whole business operation was to just steal other countries' grain. They were professional pirates. And so periodically, annually probably, they would cross the borders into Israel, and because they were bigger and mightier and stronger and tougher, they would just go take what they wanted. And so the Israelites in this sustenance culture, they would grow their grain, and here would come Aram, and they'd steal it, and they would have their kids, and here would come Aram, the country of Aram, and they would steal their kids and make them slaves, and they would find gold, and they would come take that. Well, the leader, the second most powerful person in this country, was a guy named Naaman. Naaman was the commander of the army. He was a bit of a hero in their culture. He was wealthy, and he was extraordinarily powerful. And he had leprosy. He contracted leprosy. Well, the other thing that they would take when they win is slaves. I already said that. And one of the slaves they took apparently was old enough when she was taken captive to remember Israel, but young enough to become attached to her new masters. And upon the news that Naaman had leprosy, which isn't a specific disease so much as it's a very confusing disease that no one really understands how it was contracted and how to solve it, and so it just creates hysteria, much like AIDS did several decades ago, much like I said anthrax last service, but Ebola did a few years ago, right? There's just that sense of like, ah, and we just kind of freak out because we don't know how you get it and therefore how you cure it, and that was leprosy. It's a general term that said, like, they have a disease, we don't know how they got it, we don't know how we prevent from getting it, we don't know how to cure it, and so it's just freaky, it ruins a person's life. And so this Jewish girl, said to Naaman's, to her mistress, to Naaman's wife, hey, there's a guy in Israel, he could heal him of his leprosy. Well, his wife told Naaman, and then Naaman went and told the king, like, hey, the girl in my house says that there's someone in Israel who could heal me of my leprosy. And so the king's like, well, we don't have anything to lose. Why don't we go and see what can go on there? And so here we go. He sends him with a letter. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can you kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? And then look at this. See how he's trying to to pick a quarrel with me? Now, if you're Israel, if you're the people of Israel, and you see Naaman, and you see the chariots, and you see the army marching into the country, what kind of trigger is that for you? I mean, you activate all of your protective systems. The one that didn't work this time, that you're hoping do work this time. You hide the gold, you hide the daughters, you hide the grain, you try to keep them from getting stolen. But this time, Naaman just powers right by them all, doesn't take anything, goes straight to Jerusalem, straight to the king's palace, walks right up to the front door, and gives him this letter. Now you're going, well, wait a minute. The girl never said the king could cure him. Culturally, the way the system went was God, the king, people, and earth. And so the reason he sends the letter to the king is the assumption is if there's someone in Israel who can cure somebody of their diseases, he must be the king. But he's not, of course, the one who could cure him. And the king, simultaneously, he's feeling mocked. Like, think of it this way. For how many years, in fact, it seems over the course of his entire leadership, he couldn't keep the country out of bankruptcy, if you will. He couldn't protect them from their nemesis. So imagine what his public approval rating was. And then the biggest villain in his life, his rival, shows up at his door and says, just cure Naaman. See, it seems like he jumps to conclusion here. Oh, I see the game. If I can cure him, you'll leave us alone. But because you know I can't, that'll provide an excuse for you to ransack us again, and my public approval rating will get even worse. And so he's ticked because he's feeling trapped. Well, all the while, the word gets out to Elisha, the one who can heal, that this is going on. And listen to what Elisha says. It says, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horse and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. So Elisha lives out of town in a village outside of Jerusalem. And again, so here comes Naaman, headed into this village. What are all the village people doing? They're hiding. They get to the door, and you can just kind of picture that Naaman's had this very dramatized view in his head, like he's going to show up at Elisha's door, and he's going to come out, and there's going to be this big festival, and it'll be this great thing, and he'll be healed. Not the way it happens. Talk about plans being interrupted. Talk about the need to merge. Naaman gets to the door, and Elisha doesn't even come to the door. In fact, he sends a servant boy to the door, who you just kind of have to use your imagination, cracks the door, kind of like the Hobbit, like, what are you doing here? And he says, oh, my master says, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, which, by the way, isn't in the backyard. If you could familiarize yourself with Israel's geography, is that Jerusalem sits at the top of some massive mountains, incredibly dramatic mountains. The Jordan River is to the east, about 70 kilometers, at the lowest point in earth. I don't know how many kilometers, but it's the same dramatic effect. We're talking quite a commitment for Naaman to go wash in the river. It's not just like, oh, I'll go splash around and see what happens. It's like, no, this is a several-day interruption. Naaman gets ticked. Listen to this. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. Remember, we talked about what happens when we get jolted and things don't go our way and things we're supposed to merge. What's our inclination? It's to react. It's to get mad. And Naaman's is probably no different than yours or ours would be. He's going, wait a minute. I know my problem. I know what my problem is. And I understand what the solution is. And worse yet, your solution looks nothing like the one I'm picturing. In fact, I can't figure out what your solution even has to do with my problem. See, here I think is where his story and our stories intersect. Because isn't Naaman's real issue simply this? I don't see the connection. Go ahead to that next slide. Isn't that really the issue? Pardon me, Elisha, but frankly, I do not see the connection between what you're asking me to do and how that solves my problem. In fact, I got rivers in my own country. I'm not dirty. This isn't a cleanse issue. I'm not even Jewish, so don't give me your ceremonial cleansing stuff. That's not my issue. Your river's warm and disgusting. Mine are nice and fresh. Why would I go do that? And isn't that the issue? And again, I don't think this happens very often. But every once in a while, what if what's going to happen is God's going to sidle up next to you and he's going to go, here you go. I'm asking you to do this. And we go, okay, but God, I just need some rationale. I'm a reasonable person. I love your principles. God, just point me to the principle that explains this. And though it's incredibly uncomfortable, what if every once in a while God's going to go, no, not in this one. I know you want reasons for why this is going on. And I know you want reasons for why, despite your best efforts, your business is not doing well. I know you want reasons for why your marriage is struggling. I know you want reasons, whatever, you fill in the blank. What if every once in a while God's going to go, I'm just asking you to trust me. To be honest with you, this is not even a message that I would pick because it's so uncomfortable. But it is so true, isn't it? And it does get to the point of, why does God do this? And I wonder, could it be that God understands better than we do that it's quite possible to trust his principles and his formulas more than his character? Could this bring us right back to the covenant versus contract conversation we had this winter? And the idea of God going more than anything else, I'm not just asking you to wear my jersey. I'm not just asking you to put your fish on your bumper. That's not really the thing. It's not an allegiance thing. It's a trust thing. I do this thing to my kids, and they may need therapy for it. I'm not sure. But whenever there's a lie, and I stole this, it was one of my favorite pieces of parenting advice I've ever heard. Whenever there's a lie, and they're generally pretty innocuous, I just say to them, okay, boys, what's the worst thing you can do? And they kind of pull out the script, what's the worst thing you do, boys? Lie. And then I say, why? Why is lying the worst thing you can do? And they read their script. I don't even know if they believe it, but they just kind of humor me. I'm not sure. But either way, I'm getting it in there, right? And they say, because you can't have relationship if you're lying. And I think someday they're going to try to call me on it and go well, wait a minute, isn't worshiping the devil the worst thing I can do, Dad? And I'm going to no. What if that's the issue here? What if what God is going is, listen, I understand you give, I understand you go to church, I understand all these things, and those are all good things, and they contribute to a great thing, but the great thing is, do you trust me? Do you trust me? See, I think this gets at this question. Go ahead to that next slide, Lisa. Thanks. Is when will you trust God when he withholds what you consider pertinent information? And again, none of us would pick this. And can this be abused? Of course it can. Is it often abused? Absolutely. But what if to the sincere Christ follower, every once in a while, God's going to go, I'm not giving you the pertinent information this time. Listen, isn't that what comes up over and over and over again in the text? Think of Moses. Moses leads these people out of Egypt. God's with him. They're powering through the countryside. Next thing they know, the Pharaoh's hot on their tail. They go through a mountain pass of sorts, and then they come to the Red Sea. It's impassable. And all of a sudden Moses is like, okay, Lord, you need to do something. And God goes, raise your staff. And can't you just see Moses going like, okay, let me brief you on the situation one more time, God. I got mountains on my left and mountains on my right, a giant sea in front of me, and the largest army in the world breathing down my neck. I need you to do something. And God goes, raise your staff. And Moses goes, and what happens? Ooh, the sea splits, and all of a sudden Moses is like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. It absolutely makes sense. This is genius. Because that's the way it works, right? It's not that you'll never have an answer. It's that every once in a while God's going to say, I'm going to withhold the answer until we gauge the trust. Listen, it's terrible. It's uncomfortable. I know. I get it. But what if it's part of the way God invites you to follow him because he so wants you to trust him and who he is? Listen to the way the story continues, because there's Naaman standing at it's the merge intersection. It's the collision, like the video. Here he is staring at something, and he's got all kinds of opportunity in front of him. The question is, will he merge? And he's ticked. And then Naaman's friends, they come to him. Listen to this. Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? He's exposing the ego, right? Like if he'd have said, like, go slay the dragon of Endor, like, yeah, he would have done that. If he'd have said, like, go do this dramatic thing, he'd have done that. Now he said, will you just go wash in the river? And so Naaman, he breathes, kind of gets cooled down, just like we talked about a couple weeks ago, and he goes, oh, okay, I'll go wash in the river. So he went down and slipped himself into the Jordan 7 times. Can you imagine? Like, okay, not just twice, huh? 7 times. I mean, just the patronizing. Like, seriously, Lord? 7 times. As the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, watch this. Now I'm cleansed of my leprosy. I don't have leprosy anymore. No, that's not at all what he says. Listen to what he says. Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel. You know what? Not once, and we're not even going to finish Naaman's story. I invite you to do that in your own prayer and reflection and share time. Not once does the term leprosy come up again. Naaman never mentions his leprosy again. Suddenly, the whole thing is about something else entirely. It's about God. Like, isn't this the way it works? Like, does God tell us to do things because he's in heaven going like, oh, Adam needs more rules. So he woke my parents up in the middle of the night and said, give Adam some more rules. Or does God hate rules? Is that why in the Garden of Eden there's only one? That God's chief interest was trust. Moving forward from here, Naaman never mentions leprosy. The only thing he knows is, whoa, God is real. He really is leading me. And listen, if you'll take the time, I'm just convinced you already have those stories in your life. I mean, you sit down to have dinner with your wife and you're like, thank you, God, for her, and thank you that I didn't marry her back then, right? You have those. You have those moments where you shifted your career, where you sold a business, where you moved to a town, and you go like, man, Lord, I thought I had to have that job. Thank you. And what happens in those moments? Is it about the her? Is it about the job? Is it about the resource? The Jewish people, they called them Karens. They would build things to remind themselves of those moments where God proved trustworthy. Isn't the whole text a bunch of stories of people who came up next to these moments? And God said, do something, and they went, okay, Lord, just tell me what comes after that. And God said, no, not on this one. Couldn't we say that the whole story, the whole text, it's people who came up next to these moments, and they either got to the other side when they did understand why, and they were filled with gratitude, or they were filled with regret. Like, that's our stories, right? You have 2 categories. Those where you trusted God and you went, oh, geez, Lord, that when I was 16 years old, that made no sense. Now it makes a lot of sense. Listen to the way the story continues. Naaman keeps going because what he wants to do is give them a gift. So please accept a gift from your servant, he says. And then verse 16, the prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And then even though Naaman urged him, he refused. And then look at verse 17. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. Now, that's kind of weird, right? So contextually what's going on here is in this world, your God is the God of your dirt, and my God is the God of my dirt. And so if you're going to worship my God in your world, in your country, you're going to need some of my dirt. Make sense? Doesn't make a ton of sense to us now, but that's the way they thought. And so what Naaman's going is, wait a minute. This whole encounter, it's no longer about leprosy. It's no longer about how much my life has changed. This whole moment for Naaman was suddenly about, I just met the living God. I trust him. I know he's leading me. I know he's doing things with me. I need to take some of your dirt back because I want to spend the rest of my life worshiping him. What if every once in a while, you come up next to these things and God is saying, will you just trust me? And it's not because he cares so much about your business, though he cares about your business, and it's not because he cares so much about any of the stuff that you feel like you have to have. It's because he cares so much about you and how much you trust him. Listen, I don't know what the grand piano is in your life. I know that we all have them. And either you're coming out of one of those and you're grateful, or you're feeling regret, or you're headed into one where everything in you is going like, this is dumb. I just need to get this thing off the stage. And God is going, no. I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust me. You know, the trick of all this is when we get here and we get hyper fixated on the merge, suddenly the only thing we see is uncertainty, isn't it? Like you're freaking out because everything's so uncertain. Your future's uncertain, your health's uncertain, your finances are uncertain. Like, will you be alone? Everything's uncertain. But isn't everything always uncertain? Like that's kind of what worry is, isn't it? Is suddenly becoming fixated on an uncertainty that's always been there. There's always uncertainty. You could walk out of the door and get hit by a car. Uncertainty is pretty relative. And there's a God who's going, or you can trust me. Or you can trust me. So what is it? And what are those areas where God is going, we're going to need to merge here. And you don't get to know why. You know, in just a moment, we're going to sing a song called Future Past, and it grabs and encapsulates this entire idea that at the end of the day, following Jesus is more than anything else about the firm conviction that God is trustworthy. And that we have to hold in tension his trustworthiness with oftentimes circumstances that tell us otherwise. And the choice you're making today and the choice you're making tomorrow and the choice we make every day is, do you trust God? Or do you trust you? That's really what we're up against, isn't it? Let's pray. Jesus, Lord, we lift up to you our future. Because, Jesus, you're so clearly present in our past. God, we want to trust you. And like the disciples, Jesus, we just confess to you our faith is minuscule and weak. Would you give us more? Help us with our unbelief. God, I'm thinking of those real poignant things right now that are on people's minds. Struggles and diagnoses and business situations. Hard stuff, God. Would you deliver us from evil, God? Protect us from sabotaging ourselves. God, our faith is so small so often. Would you give us the courage to follow you even when it's extraordinarily hard? Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.